Hello everyone, welcome to Hill Street. Today's story is Keep Your Eyes Closed. If you end up enjoying this story, please leave a like. And if you enjoy hearing stories from me, please subscribe and become a resident of Hill Street and let me know how I'm doing in the comments. Now, let's get to this nightmare. The camping trip started off the way they always do when you're 17. 5 of us rolling up in a minivan loaned out by apprehensive parents, rowdily taking corners and blaring music. Not a care in the world. The scenery around us turned more and more rural, farms eventually giving way to dense forest. Through all the laughter and conversation, I still got an uneasy feeling as soon as the mountain came into view. Something about it made my skin crawl. But it was only for a second, and no one else seemed to feel it, so I let it go. We took a dirt road that went parallel to a wide stream off the east side of the mountain, and eventually, we saw the cabin that James had talked up so much. "Hey, it's still here," he exclaimed, while Sarah jarred us with her braking. We excitedly crawled out, myself, Dom, Carrie, and Sarah, taking in the sight. For all of the crap James could talk, he had been entirely accurate in his description. This was his grandfather's old cabin, built in the early 40s, a place he had retreated to after his wife had passed to find some peace. He couldn't have picked a better place for it. I hoped I would find a similar peace. I had been stuck in a rut for the last few months. After much prodding from James, I had agreed to go. Looking around me at the beautiful landscape, I was glad he convinced me. It felt almost sacred. Not that we treated it that way. James hurriedly got a fire going in the pit, and soon we were all fairly hammered. Dom and Carrie had been snuggling up since we got in the van and retreated into the cabin for a while. I plopped myself in front of the fire as the chilly air started to bite and listened to James go on and on. I loved the guy, but he was always such a loudmouth. I smirked at Sarah, who was clearly his intended audience. She rolled her eyes and chuckled as his seemingly endless rant continued. "Damn, give it a rest already," Dom hollered as he and Carrie returned from the cabin with huge grins on their faces. James stopped talking and looked slightly embarrassed. "All right, but hey, someone had to drown out you two," he quipped back. Dom laughed and shoved him lightly. "Take a seat next to me," Carrie on his other side. "So, who has a good ghost story?" James asked, looking around at us eagerly. I shook my head. It was too corny, not my thing. Not getting the reaction he had hoped for, James decided it was up to him to regale us once more. "All right, okay, I've got it." He glanced at Sarah to make sure she was into it. She didn't seem against it. I groaned. This was going to be long-winded for sure. "The important thing," James started, his new tone very serious, "is that we all keep our eyes closed. I'm not doing that, Carrie said flatly. Come on, Carrie. It'll be worth it. I promise. It's a good one. James was so eager to tell his story, he was practically begging. No way, dude. You're just going to grab us or something. I'm not falling for it. She was just as adamant. I swear, I won't do anything like that. He crossed his heart. Carrie glanced over at Dom, who seemed interested in hearing the story. She sighed and crossed her arms. Fine. James beamed at her and rubbed his hands together. I finished my beer, trying to act like I wasn't just as nervous as Carrie. The mountain was right behind us. The uneasiness I felt in the van crept back into my mind as I felt its presence looming over us. Now, this is serious. Once your eyes are closed, there's absolutely no opening them until it's over. It will ruin it. James drove this point home again. His face was covered by shadow. His voice much lower than usual. He was really getting into character. We all agreed to humor him. I took one last look at everyone before we shut our eyes. James began his tale. Deep in these woods, up on the mountain, there was a shadow that lived among the trees. It was a sinister spirit that fed off fear, latching on to anyone who was unfortunate enough to come across it. The shadow stayed with you until it had robbed you of your life, leaving behind empty husks of people, taking away anything you had inside you except for pain and fear. As it consumed lives, it grew into more than a mere shadow. James sounded like he was on the other end of a tunnel. The creature was strong enough now that it started assuming a physical form. It walked freely from the forest and no longer needed to be slipped between shadows or move under darkness. It stalked its prey right up to their cottages, would wait outside their doors at night and whisper to them in their dreams. The victims would try their best to ignore what was happening to them. They tried to believe that it was just nightmares, that they were simply hearing the whispers of the wind. This would go on for months, as the creature wanted his prey to be ripe with terror when he came to harvest them. The fire was no longer warming me. Shivers were running down my spine, and the urge to open my eyes was overwhelming. I wondered if everyone was still keeping their word. When it came to harvest, James' voice was now distorted. It sounded demonic in every rite. It would appear to you as human. It was very smart. It would take its time and pretend to be a friend. You would spend so much time around it never realizing what it was. As soon as you saw it in its true form, your soul was taken. The horror of seeing this creature was too great to survive. My heart was slamming against my ribs. And now that you know, the voice speaking was not James. I was sure of it. I had to know who was across from me. Do you dare open your eyes?